at these four people and tell me who they are. So can you give me their names? Just shout it out. Who can you recognize? Branson, yes. Spielberg, excellent. Solvay, Steve Jobs, excellent. Now, what do these four people have in common? A beard, excellent. A beard, what else? Excellent. And that's actually the thing that I wanted to focus on, is that none of them achieved a degree from any university, unlike some of you in this room today. And when you think about this for a second, it's kind of astonishing, because they've changed the way we live. They've transformed communication and technology. They changed the way we travel. They changed the way we were entertained. In other words, they're icons of the 21st century and the 20th century, and yet they didn't come out of the system that prepares us for future life. And when we look at what we're facing today, and you've heard this today, we're looking at massive technological change at an accelerated rate. We're looking at social upheaval that's taking everyone by surprise, and we're facing probably the biggest challenge of our generation, which is climate change. And yet, we clearly need to be ready for change, and there's one institution that simply doesn't seem to change that much. This is a picture of a school probably taken about 100 years ago. And it looks very much like the schools that we see today. People are sitting in a room facing towards a teacher and essentially asked to answer questions correctly according to what the teacher told them. This was built during the Industrial Revolution to train factory workers to obey orders and respond to instructions. Now I want to share a little bit of my own personal experience. I went to a school not far from here called TEDxULB, and this school was actually founded 100 years ago by another bearded man called Ovid de Crolly. He was a psychologist, and he was working with children who had learning disabilities. And essentially, he believed that they wouldn't succeed, and he knew that they were struggling with the traditional education system. So he tried to change the experience and the approach. And he actually went outside and decided that if he followed the curiosity of the children, took them out for them to ask questions, to explore different subjects, he would be able to transform their learning experience. And the school exists today and has actually grown and welcomed even more students. But what I really found interesting was one of the things he said, and a teacher shared this with me. He said that school should be a laboratory for learning, and that it should be a constant process of experimentation. And when you think about the challenges that we're facing as a society, it's clear that the way we're being prepared simply isn't adequate. And as Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems at the same level of thinking that created them. Now, that got me thinking, what's that level of thinking that we need? How do we need to approach these problems? And I decided that since I couldn't find the answer, I would actually do my own humble attempt at creating that mindset, trying to organize the idea of the thinking that we needed to be successful in the 21st century. And I call this hyperthinking, because we live in the age of the hyperlink, and we need our thinking to be adapted to this new information of constant change. And that has 4 different stages. And what I'm going to do over the next couple of minutes is tell you how we can apply that thinking to education in particular. Now, the first of those 4 stages I call hypershifting. And the idea is that we're all trapped in our vision of the world. We all see the world through a unique pair of glasses. Now, when we remove those glasses, it changes what we see. In my case, I see a kind of blurred audience because I'm slightly short-sighted. But then, when we change our pair of glasses, something magical happens. It changes what we see. And that's essentially a shift of paradigm, a shift of perception. And what we need to do is to get much better at challenging our preconceptions and at changing the way we see the world. And when we look at education, there are 3 preconceptions that I want to challenge. The first one is that we really think of education taking place in schools, buildings geographically located somewhere. Now, when we look at the technology available, we don't need to be physically located somewhere to be able to reach out to people or to information. We can do it from anywhere. The second misconception we have is that there's a profession that owns teaching, and they're the ones who know how you can learn. Now, this is fundamentally flawed if we live in an age of constant change, because even they can't keep up with what's happening. And what we need to do as individuals and as a society is to reclaim ownership of learning. You need to take responsibility for your own learning and become what I call a self-learner. And the third misconception we have is that education takes place at very specific times in our lives. We go to kindergarten, then we go to school, then we go to university, and then we're ready for life. You can just go out there and start doing whatever you do. And again, in an age of constant change, this just doesn't work. We have to learn every single day of our lives, right until the day we die, if we're going to keep up with the tremendous changes we're facing today. Now, the second stage in hyperthinking is what I call hyperlinking, which is about embracing and understanding the networks and the digital channels that surround us. Now, I actually watched a TED Talk about a year ago by someone called Sugata Mitra, and he talked about his vision for a school in the clouds. And one of the examples he gave was that people from the UK were teaching over Skype to remote schools in villages in India to help them find English teachers because they were sorely lacking in resources. I watched the talk, and then a couple of weeks later, by complete coincidence, I met someone actually from Brussels who had actually funded a school in Pondicherry near India. And he said he had a problem with the English teaching. So he was wondering how he could get better books or better help to teach them. I said, why don't we try this idea? So I actually went to India, to the school itself, a year ago in Pondicherry. And we tried to set up the link. There were already computers and internet, but what was missing was the people coming together. This is actually the first cloud teaching experiment we did, and you can see my mom in the screen. And the second one is my wife actually doing one of the classes over her mobile. This has been running for a year now, pretty much daily, and we have people teaching these kids from everywhere around Europe and transforming the lives of some of these kids. And what they love most about the experience isn't just the English that they get, but it's that it's a window into the world. And I find that absolutely extraordinary. Now, the second thing we can do by understanding these hyperlinks is to understand the incredible information that's available for us today. But it's not just any information. In the last couple of years, there's a movement called the MOOCs, the Massive Open Online Courses, that started to transform the way we learn. Some of the best universities in the world, MIT, Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, and thousands of others have started to share their information for free. So you can start educating yourself when you want, from where you want, and continue to develop your mind and your understanding of different things. How many of you actually have done an online course? You can put up your hands if you have. It's about half the room. And I think it's great, and I would suggest to the other ones to start looking at this because it's an amazing resource that just didn't exist before. That brings me to the third stage of hyperthinking, which is to hyperlearn. And that goes back to the idea that we all need to become self-learners and that we need to understand and embrace creativity. Now, creativity, as we've heard, is not something that belongs to the selected few. It's a core skill. But in an age where change is constant and the challenges we face are unique, we're going to have to invent new solutions. And for us to invent new solutions, we have to imagine them and become creative. So every one of you has to become experts at creativity, and that means learning creativity skills. And there are plenty of tools to do that. There's, for instance, design thinking. I took a course in this online from Stanford last year. Fantastic tool to help you to approach things from a different perspective. There are thinking hats. This is a methodology from Edward de Bono, invented almost 30 years ago, that allows you to shift your perspective on ideas. And the mind maps that is becoming increasingly widespread. But all these tools and many more should be taught in schools and embraced by individuals. Now, what I really love about the symbol that we have for creativity is that we use the light bulb, which is also, by the way, the symbol of the event today, Ready for Change. Because it was the invention of Thomas Edison. And he actually said, when he was asked about failure, that he hasn't failed, but he simply found 10,000 ways to make a light bulb that don't work. Now, any of you who are going to try to do something successful, you will have to fail many times before you succeed. And trust me, I speak from personal experience. Failure is the best way to learn and the only way to do something different and something great. And that's the fourth dimension, which I call hyperacting, which is about taking your ideas and putting them in practice, because you can only see whether your idea will work if you're able to try it out. Now, if we're going to change our own ideas of education and the system of education that dominates our society, it's not going to be about a debate or an intellectual process. It's going to be about putting ideas in practice and trying it out in your own lives and in the lives of the people that you want to help. Now, I want us to think about the quote from Gandhi that says, you have to be the change that you want to see in the world. Because if we're going to change education and learning, we have to start embracing the idea that we have to become self-learners and take ownership and responsibility for our learning. We have to use these amazing digital networks which had never existed before. I mean, this is the first generation that has access to such amazing information free of charge. And the third thing we need to do is to become masters of creativity. Now, if we do that, then we're going to be able to start changing things and go back to this vision of school as a real laboratory for learning and join in this amazing experiment. And I want to apologize for the students who just graduated or finished their exams, because this is not the end, this is the beginning of your real learning experience. And I hope you embrace that. And with this idea, and I think as my story in India shows, every one of you can take simple actions that can have a profound effect on yourselves and other people. And I hope that with this idea you can start the journey and become a student for the 21st century and hopefully make a dent in the universe. Thank you.